Hi, you're on the edge with me, Max Keiser. Time now to go to Georgia and speak with none other than Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts was in the Treasury Department of the Reagan Administration. He was an editor of the Wall Street Journal and a prolific writer and author of Supply Side Revolution, How the Economy Was Lost. Dr. Roberts, welcome back to On the Edge.
Thanks, Max.
All right, Dr. Roberts, you served in the Reagan administration. You're known as the father of Reaganomics. Tell us, is the modern Republican Party just a bunch of crazy clowns performing for a party of children?
I think that's a correct designation, except they're performing for the rich, the small elite party of rich.
All right, so you've got a group of candidates running on the Republican side of the aisle, and they seem completely beholden to outside influences such as the Koch brothers, for example. Is that what you mean by the elite?
Well, that's just, the Koch brothers are probably just a very small part of it, and I think probably not that important. I mean Wall Street, Goldman Sachs or Gold Sachs.
On the subject of Goldman Sachs, so what Blankfein and Goldman Sachs are being charged with, of course, is they're selling fraudulent selling practices, selling securities that they knew to be faulty, and then making bets against the clients who bought these securities knowing that the clients would fail. So they made money selling them the faulty securities, and they made some additional money profiting from making negative bets on the very same clients who ended up with these faulty securities. So we've seen the same thing happening in Europe now. Remember, Goldman Sachs was active in Greece. They got them into the euro in 2001 by selling them an accounting fraud and hiding debts. And now Goldman and John Paulson, the hedge fund manager, are licking their chops, moving in to grab those assets. So Greece, Ireland, Portugal, are they being subjected to the same kind of financial terrorism that we've seen in the United States?
Oh, yes, more so, more so.
And what would be the recourse for the people of Greece at this point, in your opinion, Dr. Roberts, if they have any?
Well, they'd have to overthrow the government and arrest them and indict them and put them in jail for participating in the fraud. Look, we know by now that all the countries in Europe that got into trouble as a result of Wall Street and the fraudulent instruments are imposing the cost of the adjustment on ordinary people, on poor people, on what remains of middle class, on students. In England, they raised the tuition to bail out the bankers. In Greece, they throw everybody out of work and cut all their social benefits to rescue the bankers. So these are not democratic outcomes. The West prides itself that it's the standard for the world, that it's a democracy. But nowhere do you see democratic outcomes. Not in Greece, not in Ireland, and not in the UK, not here. The outcomes are always to punish the innocent and reward the guilty. And that's what the Greeks are in the streets again, protesting. They're energetically protesting that they cannot get a democratic outcome out of an alleged democratic government. We see this all over the West. It's a big pretense. There's no democracy. There are oligarchies. Some of these smaller European countries are not even run by their own governments. They're run by the Americans or Wall Street. So the whole thing is a fraud. There's probably more democracy in China, which Hillary Clinton beat up for the lack of which, than there is in the West.
Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary in the Reagan Administration, you're saying that revolution is the only recourse for the Greek people. And
the Irish and all the rest.
Right. So for Ireland, now the line that the IMF is giving is saying that revolution or default, even on the debts, would be catastrophic. Is that true?
No. Catastrophic for who? For the American bankers?
Right. So in other words, in Iceland, we had an example of a government kicking out the banksters. They had, very tough 2 years. Now they're growing again. Can you make the comparison with Greece and Ireland to in Iceland?
Max, look, just the other day, the Irish government announced that because it was now busted because of the bailout, it was going to confiscate with a tax part of the accumulated pensions of the Irish people. You know, the pensions that accumulate tax-free until they are paid out in retirement benefits. So, you know, I had predicted that this would be one of the responses, and it will happen in the United States as well, and in England and elsewhere. So they turned to whatever remaining reservoir of wealth that there is, and that's the pension holdings, the private pension holdings. And so the Irish government has now announced it's going to confiscate part of their pension holdings of the Irish people. Well, this is not a democratic outcome. This the Irish people will not vote for that any more than the Greek people would have voted for the bailout. And so we are confronted with a curious situation throughout the West. We think we have democracy. We hold ourselves up high. We demonize China for the lack of it. We talk about the mafia state of Russia. We go on and on about the Arabs and so on. But where is the democracy here?
Let's change gears for a second and talk about the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar has been in long-term decline. Recently, it's enjoyed a bit of a rally, timed almost to the minute with the spectacle in Pakistan involving Osama bin Laden, ostensibly. It appears as though the fortunes of the dollar are tied to brazen acts of state-sponsored terror and violence. Is there anything other than violence backing the U.S. dollar, or is it purely the representation of bloody mass genocide and murder?
Well, I think what backs the dollar, Max, is the fact that it remains the world reserve currency.
But you see deals right now between China and Russia and Brazil and other countries doing bilateral deals. They're getting out of the dollar. India's doing deals on the side, out of the dollar. Everyone wants to get out of the dollar. They don't want to fund America's occupations of these very countries that they are abusing with the world reserve currency status. So that reserve currency status is now shrinking, obviously, because you've got all this bilateral currency swaps going on. So, but other than the military and the Pentagon and the threat of extinction, if you try to escape the dollar matrix, is there anything backing the dollar? You've written extensively about offshoring and outsourcing as killing and gutting the manufacturing industry, so that doesn't represent the dollar. What does the dollar represent now other than mass murder?
Well, as I said, it's tradition. It's the reserve currency. Everything is priced in dollars, oil, grains. And it's also the source of American power. And that is why the Chinese and the Brazilians and the Russians are trying to get away from it, because it's a way to reduce American power. And I think that's what's motivating them more than the declining value of the dollar itself. They realize that the way the United States is able to exercise hegemony over the world is financial, through the dollar as a reserve currency. And that's why we're able to freeze everybody's assets and banks and so forth and so on. So now, to get to the broader question about the dollar and what's happening, it's certainly not enjoying any revival. You know, all downward trends have little up blips all along the way, and that's all that's happened lately. There's no recovery in the dollar.
Okay, but which came first? Was it hatred of the dollar, therefore weakness in the dollar, or is it the move by various countries around the world who see the fall in the dollar that they're precipitating the leave in the dollar? In other words, what's the cause and what's the effect? You're saying they're co-terminal.
It's not a question, Max. It's not a question of that. They want to get rid of the dollar because, I mean, people who fear our intrusiveness into their affairs would like to see that curtailed, and weakening the dollar is one way that occurs. If it loses its reserve currency status, it doesn't allow the Americans to boss the world. Now, the economic aspects are different, and they are equally important.